Awesome Sprinkles. Hey YouTube, Awesome Writer here. For this week's writer video, there's not a whole lot to talk about with Gotchard. They're in this sort of filler arc. There's nothing interesting to talk about with the episode previews. So I thought I would talk about just writer in general, as of what I want to see out of the next writer, and I guess a little bit beyond. You know, we haven't gotten, at least as of this recording, or as far as I know, any early rumors or anything like that about what the next writer's name's gonna be, the theme or whatever. But it is funny that every year when it comes to Sentai and Writer, when we get the earliest rumors and whispers, I always think, oh, is it really that time already? This time I could not be more ready to be done with Gotchard. Like, we're almost 30 episodes in, quite a ways in, and yet I simultaneously feel like we've been in this purgatory forever, but it also feels like we just started because of how little has happened in a lot of ways, or at least how little I'm invested in. So this is the first time in a long time, possibly the first time I've been this excited to move away from this writer and move on to the future for numerous reasons. But I wanted to talk about some of the stuff I would like to see out of next year's writer. In general, just a protagonist that doesn't have such a punchable face, one that's not so pathetic that you feel like you could flick him over with your finger. That would be nice. In general, I don't understand Toku's fascination with this really twerpy, wimpy looking protagonist, but I would like to not have that, especially to Hotaro's degree. I hate to be so harsh on it, but even someone like Sogo, like you look at Sogo, be honest, he looks a little wimpy. I'm not saying he could deliver badass moments, but when called upon, he could at least deliver a performance that was somewhat believable as heroic and, I don't know, cool adjacent. But Hotaro, my god, I've never seen such a pathetic person. So just someone that's not so pathetic. I mean, honestly, in general, I want to get away from this type of character, and it feels like so many of the characters are cut from the same cloth. It feels like they have a template, they change one or two things around. I'd like to have more variations on our main protagonist instead of just having basically three templates, which is twerperson, badass, and then some kind of in between. If we have to work within those confines, you know, I would like to get another badass. We just got one with Geats, but I wouldn't mind that. But I kind of just want some in middle of the road, like Drive or Wizard, where they're not a thundering, loony twerp that you just want to punch. They're not a badass jerk. They're just kind of a person. They're kind of cool sometimes. They can be a little dorky maybe. Just a little bit normal too. That would be fine. In general, I'd like to see more different types of characters, but I wouldn't mind just getting a normal, middle-of-the-road person that's just like a normal human being. That would be great. Speaking of protagonists, I also want to get away from this specialist boy trope. And that doesn't just mean the twerpy characters, that extends to stuff like Geats too. Geats as a character was a lot easier to watch and enjoy because he wasn't so pathetic and he was cool, but they still fell into that same trope of they're the chosen one, their point of view is the rightest way, especially when it comes to the point of view thing. I get sick to death of having some sort of moral debate or philosophy or whatever, and by the end of this series, everybody that's at least somewhat heroic comes around to the main writer's point of view. Like, that's the only point of view that matters and worships them, and it's so boring, and I get tired of this worship around the main character's point of view in general. But also, you know, this show's for kids, which is always brought up, and which is why I think it's a good idea to teach kids that there are multiple points of view and they can always be valid. Now, obviously there's bad points of view, like you don't want to be a killer or a racist and stuff like that, but there are all kinds of other situations where people might have different philosophies or approaches, and they're equally as valid, and teaching kids that you should just fall in line behind one person, I don't think is a good thing. And I think it would just be nice to have a series where if we have a couple different writers, entertain those points of view as equally valid. Maybe they even learn from each other, like, oh, this aspect of your approach isn't so bad, I'm gonna keep with mine, but stop worshiping the main character, especially if they're a twerp. Speaking of the amount of writers, you know, I feel like most of the series have wound up being the same. You start off with maybe one or two, and then you end up with 5+, and I don't know, I wouldn't mind if they dialed it back. I'm fine with either way, mini writer, middle of the road, small writer, so long as it's handled well. I suppose if I had to pick, I wouldn't mind going one or two series going back to that sort of double through wizard formula where you only have two main writers, where you have your main character and then you have your secondary writer showing up kind of like in a Six Ranger-esque fashion. Obviously leaving room for other writers to show up in movies, maybe a villain writer like Gold Drive or something like that, but I wouldn't mind dialing it back to something of that nature. The only other thing I would say is if you're going to do a series that's kind of not necessarily a many writer series like Geats or Ryuki, or a smaller writer like Double, and you do it kind of in between, at least be honest about it from the front, instead of having this thing where every time a character shows up they have to be a writer. But I would like them to dial it back a little bit. I also hope that they could fix the pacing a little bit on the forms. You know, that would be nice. I know that's a pipe dream, and every series when I start reviewing it, I always complain about how fast the ability forms come out. That's honestly overall a minor nitpick, but it would be nice to have one episode in between. Like if you debut the water form, let's have an episode after that to showcase it, then debut the other one instead of doing back to back to back. At the very least, don't do what Gotchard did, which, you know, setting my general dislike of Gotchard aside, I've never seen it done like that before. Like almost every Rider series will debut the ability forms back to back. But the way they would be like, okay, here's this vine form, and then they wouldn't even finish the episode with it. Like they would debut it, like, oh, here's this vine form, but then they would transform to the previously debuted form from the previous episode for the finisher, which made the current form debuting feel even more lost and forgettable. And they did that almost every time. It was so weird. Just don't do that. I don't mind a different structure to the way you debut the forms, or, you know, using multiple ability forms at once, but it just muddled everything, and it made them feel even more forgettable when you were mixing and matching them within their own debut. Also, I don't know, I'm sure there's like 15 anniversaries coming up, but no anniversary or legacy characters or cameos or any of that garbage. Save those for those poop movies that I never want to watch. Save it all for there. Again, the comment section all the time being like, I wonder what they're going to do for these 15 anniversaries that are coming up. I'm like, do nothing! Please, for the love of God, do nothing! I hate how obsessed this community and the franchise is with anniversaries, but I don't want to see anything like Kamen Rider Legend in the main series. Again, those movies, those hot messes, do whatever you want with them, but don't put it in the series, please. That would be great. So I think lastly, I want to see them just shake things up a little bit. It was really nice to see Super Sentai shake up the formula for about 2-3 years. We're going a little bit back to basics now, but this Toku in general, especially Rider and Sentai, can get so monotonous and like purgatory and repetitive, and when you have a weaker series like Gotchard, that becomes even more apparent. Because there's nothing wrong with a back-to-basics series that's actually entertaining, but in general, I wish Rider would shake things up a little bit. I'm not asking for anything revolutionary, but maybe just in small ways. Something like Geats. I think Geats was kind of a perfect, almost midway point between certain Rider hallmarks and traditions and checkpoints, but also a little bit structurally different. And I would like to see them experiment for at least a couple years. Again, I'm not asking for it to feel like night and day. Stick within a little bit of a comfort zone, but try to be a little bit different in some way. I think especially after Gotchard being so back to basics after one experimental year. Like I saw so many people being like, well, they experimented with Geats. I'm like, 1 year? That's all you're gonna do? So I would like to see them change things up a little bit. Keep me guessing so I'm not like, okay, here's this part and here's this part and I'm just following the same path. I would also like to see them take better advantage of the theme. You know, I think that's more so, I'm thinking about that because of this year with Gotchard, where the chemis, they're clearly trying to make them a thing, but I feel they're not doing enough to make me invested. And I think the alchemy theme is almost completely wasted outside of aesthetically in the earlier forms. So whatever the theme is, I just hope it's take advantage of in a way that, you know, make the gimmick exciting, whatever it is, and make the theme integrated into the show to give it a unique flavor. But that is just it for me. What do you guys want to see out of next year's Rider series and beyond? Let me know in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell to get notifications for my videos. Dawson Rider, signing out.